to mention something I normally mention at the beginning is that at a workshop, it's the most unnatural place to paint. I mean, you're painting with a group of people instead of on your own as usual, and you're in a new location. You're painting maybe different techniques and media that you're used to, and you're not used to an audience and the the environment outdoors particularly. It's just all very new and stressful for be able to paint your best work. So and I don't expect a workshop finished paintings. This is to learn some basic principles and to practice some new skills, and it's not to produce paintings. It's not, we're not trying to send you home with a painting you can show, somebody and say, oh, look what I spent my $500 for. So don't feel like you have to finish anything. It's just the learning process. Hopefully when you get home, then you can start applying it to your own situation. So don't feel any pressure at all there. If you don't even finish one painting, or if you do 2 or 3, that's not important. It's what you learn in the process, because everybody's at a different stage of their work. And so this I just wanted to show before we go out, because it will review and will give you a little bit of preparation for what you need to be doing when you're setting up to actually paint. When we're talking about plein air painting, there's a lot of things to deal with that you're not used to. But it's mainly developing your observation skills and learning to see better, particularly landscape in this case. And this is a quote by Andrew Loomis, who was a really fantastic artist back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. It's foolish for the artist to try to compete with a camera in achieving fidelity to detail. Better that he use his creative and imaginative powers and direct his efforts towards design. And so that's why I emphasize getting just the big, bold, simple, basic shapes and values. Don't worry about detail. That can always come later. He goes on to say, even if he uses a camera for working material, the artist can still concentrate upon the things that a camera cannot do. He can subordinate and eliminate, design and rearrange, simplify, and take other liberties. So that's what we do. As you saw in my painting yesterday, I rearranged and changed the image. It's just a starting point for your painting. But I want to emphasize that at the beginning of the painting, you want to do a lot of squinting, where you're just seeing the basic shapes and values and not detail. Try to squint, see the big shapes and values, and then look at your canvas and see if you see the same shapes and values in the same relationship. That'll help you catch the mistakes very quickly. Here's our Taos scene again, and I just want to emphasize this is the scene. This is what you want to see. You want to squint and see these values as big, simple, graphic shapes rather than mountains, trees, whatever. So and preferably ignore or filter out the color to an extent. So this is basically the value thing. And you think in terms of those big shapes and values. Don't think of them as trees. And this is where the aesthetic categories come in, is that you learn to think not in literal categories. Tree, grass, mountain, sky. Those are literal categories that really don't communicate much. What communicates is what value is it, what hue is it, what shape is it, rather than just some literal description. So that's what you want to do as an artist, to learn to think in those terms. Avoid even using the literal terms as much as possible. Just say big dark shape, the shape like a cylinder. It's 80% black, and it's it's got ragged edges, and those kinds of really descriptive terms rather than literal. And then this is just a little guide to help you think in terms of how to crop, because when you're painting outdoors, as we talked about, it's more like 360 degrees, and you got to learn how to use your cropping tool to narrow down your focus. So when you use that cropping tool, what you want to do is, once you hold it up, move it in and out until you get how you want it to crop. Make note mentally of where important things intersect the edge of the canvas or the edge of the tool, like where the mountains go off. Is that a 25% down? Is it halfway down? Where the field of flowers, is that about halfway up that canvas? You make note of those mentally. And then any major elements, how far they are from the edge, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So for example, make note where that mountain, for example, goes off. And then where the flowers go off the edge, because that's an easy thing to mark. And where the mountain on the other side goes off. And then, for example, here where these two mountains intersect, that's an important intersection point. And so make note of that. And if you'll notice, you can actually measure. It's almost exactly the same as from the top to the first mountain on the left as it is from the left to that little intersection. Those are equal distances. So if you got your canvas, now I was setting up for an oil painting here, but it's exactly the same. Here's my canvas, and notice how on the left I have marked with little tick marks where the mountain goes off, where the grass or where the flowers, the field ends there next to the fence, and then where the mountains intersect, and then where it goes off on the right. The mountain goes off on the right. Now just analyzing the image and finding those points, 2, 3, 4 points, is a big help, because from those points you can easily pretty much sketch in all the other major elements. And you want to be fairly careful about finding those points, because the more accurate you place those, the more accurate your drawing is going to be based on those points. So here in this case, 4 points reasonably closely matching the cropping makes the drawing so much easier, and also serves as a guide for every time you pull up your cropping guide. You'll recall, okay, the mountain's got to go off here. You can reposition your cropping guide real quickly and easily. You flip back up to double check your drawing or your painting. Okay. You transfer those measurements, those visual measurements, to the canvas as I did here, and then you draw from there. And here's what I'm talking about. Obviously, these points in this picture, these major points are the ones I was finding. Another useful tool in terms of getting accuracy in your drawing in plein air, we don't have the advantage of working from a photograph where you can literally lay down a ruler and measure things with a photograph in the studio, but outdoors there are still ways to measure and to get proper proportions. And let me show you what I mean by that. Here's this scene. It will show you first of all how the image is carried out in terms of the drawing from that point. Determine where the mountains fall and those other rather simple images are based on those initial points, and then sketch in where the darks are, the secondary darks, and so forth. Now here we go in terms of looking at units of measure in the field. I'd find an object that is not going to move on me and that is easy to see and to measure. For example, that roof. And using a pencil or maybe a brush, whatever you have. In this case, with my thumb, I hold my arm out, straighten my elbow, and I measure the width of that roof. And mark it basically indicate it with my thumb and the length of the pencil. And then using that as a unit of measure, it's not an inch, but it's a unit of measure, it's a roof measure. I can measure the distance from the outer edge to that intersection of those mountains is exactly the same. So that alone tells me, okay, when I draw that roof, I need to make it exactly the same distance as from the outer edge to that intersection point there. And that way, those two things are in perfect proportional relationship. And then I can walk it across. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 4.5 roof units across. So even without a cropping tool, I can determine where the parameters are in that picture simply by using the roof as a measuring instrument. And I know here, for example, that it's almost 1 roof unit down from the top to that intersection point. So I can double check. See if I get that measurement to match the measurement from the left side to that intersection point, and that matches my roof, then I know all those elements are in the right proportional relationship to one another, and my drawing is accurate. Okay? And here I can measure down in 1, 2, 3, and just almost like 3 1/3 units down. So I can use that to find different relationships. For example, here it's 1 unit, 2 units. So it's just a little less than a unit and 3/4 to where the field of flowers begins, for example. So I can check my measurements that way. You can double check, just like you would if you were drawing from a photograph. Here's another. I take that measurement to the roof line, and it's just a little over 1 roof increment from the right edge to that roof. So I can place that red roof exactly where it needs to go. And I can also see that to that other house, from the far left edge of that red roof to the far left edge where the peak of that blue house is, that's 1 red roof unit. So I can get that proportion exactly right. So you can use just simply taking one element and then making sure everything else in the picture is in the proper proportional relationship to that 1 unit of measure, and that will greatly increase your accuracy when you're drawing it. Or if you think, gee, that doesn't look quite right, well, find a unit of measure and start using it for a reference point. And this is important and be very useful because this is exactly the way you do portraits. Is you find from life. You measure, I generally will use the measurement from the eyebrow to the base of the nose, for example. And then I'll measure every other feature in the face based upon that unit of a measure. Is it a nose unit? How many nose units is it to the ear? To the chin, to the hairline, whatever. And it forces the picture into perfect proportion because you make everything consistent with one measurable thing, that nose unit. So doing it here will help you do portraits better, learning to measure in the field. And here, for example, from the top of that mountain, it's 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, I see. From the top of that mountain to the top of the roof, it's about 1.5 roof units. So I can double check if I got my mountain the correct height. Once you get that unit, the key, of course, is always lock your elbow when you're doing this and hold your arm when you take your measurements. Don't ever bend your elbow, because what will happen, you'll take a measurement here with your elbow bent. You'll go over here and your elbow will change. So always lock your elbow and hold your position. Don't move or lean forward or shift your feet when you're doing these measurements. Okay. Any questions on that? Kind of practice that. It's extremely useful. And you can use it even working from a photograph. I use it. I'll have an 8x10 photograph I'm working with. I'll just go take quick measurements to do my lay-in on a simple image rather than going and getting detailed with a ruler or something.
So a grid is kind of
it's in essence a grid. You're creating a kind of a abstract grid there. A lot quicker. Yeah, in the field, it's really the only way. Even though I've seen people try to set up grids with transparent plastic where they can see through the grid, but that's very undependable. I mean, the slightest little shift and everything's off. Okay. Couple of guidelines, and these are on your printouts. Try to prepare as much as possible in advance so you don't have to do anything in the field that is not absolutely necessary. Minimize the supplies and equipment. Don't take anything unless you absolutely need it. Because what I like to do is I like to have the same pastels, and I become an expert with those pastels. If you start changing around too much, you're always experimenting. I'd rather be very good at one thing than not so good at a bunch of things. That's why I only use 3 color backgrounds, white, or a kind of a tan like that, like I used yesterday, or a mossy green. And that's the only backgrounds I use, because I know exactly what colors will do and my pastels will do on those. If I start, the old Canson paper comes in a rainbow of colors, that's great, but every time you pull out a new color, it's like starting all over, relearning. So I'd rather master a few things and give yourself time to really don't jump into the painting too quickly. Make sure you've kind of looked around and found something that grabs you. You use your cropping tool to find your composition. You produce 3 to 5 value thumbnail sketches. Like here, I did a little thumbnail. Okay, that's a scene. Let's see. That thumbnail basically is what I see there. But how does it look if I crop in tighter and a little more dramatic, make the mountain more the dominant element in that, and just a little foreground? That's not a bad cropping. And how about this if I pull back and a little further, so you can kind of play around a little bit with your composition. That's where your thumbnails come in handy, and they just take a few minutes to do, but they're worth the effort. Photograph the scene. I always recommend photograph it before you get started painting, because once you get painting, you'll forget, and then you'll wait an hour or two later. And you think, oh, I need to photograph it. Well, the sun has changed. So get a photograph early, so that your first impression of what attracted you to the scene, you've got it on film, or you've got it in your camera to refer back to. Determine your eye level. I talked a lot yesterday about the other night about the importance of eye level. So be conscious of your eye level, and especially if there are man-made objects and buildings and things in the scene, be sure you understand where things are in relationship to your eye level. Here's an example. This is a little scene on Canyon Road. I used to have a gallery. I was in a gallery that was right across the street from this, across the little alley from this beautiful little courtyard. And I was sitting in a chair when I painted this, so that's my eye level was just right there below the fence. And you can tell to some extent because everything above it is going downhill. And even though that building in the far back, it's going downhill in another direction because of its placement, it's still going downhill because it's receding away from me. And then the things in front of me, below the eye level, are going uphill. See, the rocks, the bushes, everything. It helps you be conscious of that to create a sense of the perspective. And so these are the lines of reference I would be conscious of when I was laying in that drawing. Do the big shapes and big values. Forget the detail, just the big shapes and values. Edit them down. And draw your shadows in. Draw them as if they're an actual object, so that you see where all the edges of the shadows are before the sun moves. And if you've got something in the scene that is moving, like clouds, for example, or maybe a horse or a cow or something that's in the scene, if you're good at quick sketching, sketch it in, but otherwise wait till near the end of the painting to render those things that are moving. That way you can focus on them and while they're in the position you want. Because if you draw them in early and then you don't get to really paint them for another 30 minutes, well, they may be completely gone. So when you're putting in your darks and lights in that early stage, do not paint in your lights. Put in your darks, your secondary darks. Let the neutral value, the 50% value of the paper, serve as a placeholder for your lights and your middle tones. Okay? And be careful not to, and when you do put in your lights, when I say light, I just mean it's lighter than the middle tone, but it's not white.
Yeah.
You want to be careful not to go super light. Yeah. Okay. And it is harder to cover that up than dark. Okay. And then don't rush, but don't waste time either, because time is of the essence of plein air work. Try to finish what you're doing within 3 hours, because the sun moves so much within 3 hours that everything has changed tremendously. And you can kind of judge how much change by the sun moves at about 15 degrees per hour, which is approximately the width of your palm. So you can hold up your palm and you can see where the sun's going to be just by measuring out where it's going to be in 3 hours or in 2 hours, and it can help you kind of judge what's going on. And don't worry about whether you finish a plein air painting. Plein air paintings typically, actually, I didn't do another of mine except sign my name, but usually you're going to always do some work on it when you get back home. If you're going to carry it beyond just sketching stage. And here's just a sample. This is where we're going to be Friday, by the way. We're going to be right down by that bridge. And this is John Dunn Bridge. There's the initial sketch. I'll try to demonstrate a sample. This is working on white paper, or do a sketch, and then wash in with turpenoid and a pastel, a general underpainting, to create basically a middle tone underpainting, but with varied color notes rather than being just a flat, brown, for example. And then you work on top of that to build your colors and values. So that was the finish. And here's just a few samples. These are all plein air studies on location, all done within usually 2 hours. I rarely spend more than 2 hours. But just concentrating, if you get the big shapes right, the details take care of themselves. This is an oil painting on the plaza in Santa Fe. This is a scene where we're going to be going Friday, down by the river. This is a summer thaw, or spring thaw. This is here in Taos on Ladue Street. And that's Santa Fe on the plaza. And this is an oil. This is a pastel over in Albuquerque, looking towards Albuquerque. You can't see it, but that's Albuquerque down there in the blue. Okay. But I would have ruined it if I started trying to put in streets and buildings and things. And that's Madrid, a little scene in Madrid.
I love that.
It's great, yeah. This is here on Quisnell Street, and this is Pilar, not far from here. And that's the end. Okay.